Hello. I hope you can all hear me, and I recognize we have the good fortune of being right after lunch, so we hope you're all well-fed and eager to participate in this next conversation. Thank you so much for being here. This panel really does present an exciting opportunity to have a discussion with some key entrepreneurial leaders in the social sector, the business sector, here at home in the United States and all around the world. One of the top concerns that entrepreneurs have articulated everywhere, and perhaps more so in the last few years because of what's been happening in our financial markets, is access to capital. And while we recognize that capital is the oxygen of our business, today we hope to learn more about what are some of the constraints and what are some of the ideas or initiatives that are starting to alleviate those constraints so that entrepreneurial change agents all around the world can get access to the resources, capital and technical resources, relationship resources, and ideas necessary to really take forward their spirit and their energy. At the U.S. Agency for International Development, we've had a long history in providing support to entrepreneurs in various forms. We're proud to have supported microfinance and microenterprise in more than 60 countries. In 2008 alone, we supported more than 4 million borrowers and almost 3 million savers, 62% of which were women. But as we all know, microfinance is one small part of what's necessary. Programs like our Palestinian Investment Partners Program and countless others that leverage our development credit authority and ability to bring credit and technical support to small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and in some cases, large initiatives, are also a critical part of the solution. In fact, one of the program leaders from the Palestinian Investment Partners is here today, Fatima Al-Jada, and we were pleased to understand that our recent support for your work has led to a sewing workshop in business that's created sales growth of over 130% and 65 new jobs. Through all of these efforts, we've really tried to learn what works and what doesn't work in supporting entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial activity. We recently had a global jam, which is a sort of international online opportunity to listen to others tell us how we can do things differently. We had more than 7,000 participants from more than 150 countries come talk to us on that 3-day online event. And it was a great opportunity to listen to leaders from all around the world. But what we heard led us to believe that we have some challenges going forward in this space in particular. We heard very clearly that, especially in the area of entrepreneurship, that we as an agency and that with so many of our partners could do a much better job of taking risks, of finding entrepreneurs, and of providing them with support at different levels of activity, whether it's a small business in a rural village or a large enterprise in a major urban area. We learned that deal flow is a real constraint for firms and for funds that are out there, especially when trying to provide support in $20,000 at a time to small-scale businesses. Articulating the opportunities and going out and sourcing deals that can then be transacted upon proved to be a real challenge. And we learned that some of the tools that we have here in the United States, as advanced as they might be for our economy, are not always the most effective tools to be deployed in Muslim-majority countries, especially in this area and in this field. So to help grapple with some of these challenges, we're pleased that today we have an absolutely outstanding panel to have an open discussion with you about those challenges and a number of others. And I will just briefly introduce each of our panelists. First, Arif Naqvi is founder and group chief executive officer of Abraaj Capital, the largest private equity group in the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia, with paid-up capital of $1.5 billion. Abraaj has been associated with some of the region's most notable transactions and has won numerous awards, including the Middle East Private Equity Firm of the Year award from the London-based Private Equity International, 5 years in a row since 2005. Wow, that's quite telling. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to some of your ideas, especially on creating SME funds and what you look for in an entrepreneur. Fred Hochberg is the 23rd president of the Export-Import Bank of the United States, the U.S. government's official export credit agency. Mr. Hochberg has more than 30 years of experience in business, government, and philanthropy. From 2004 to 2008, he was dean of the New School for Management Urban Policy. And from 1998 to 2001, he served as deputy and then acting administrator of the Small Business Administration. Before that time, he was the president and chief operating officer of the Lillian Vernon Corporation, where he led the transformation of a family mail-ordered company into a publicly traded, highly successful direct marketing corporation, and was called one of the greatest success stories of American entrepreneurship by Forbes magazine. And that's in a country with a lot of competition, so thank you, Fred. Melody Barnes is the director of the White House Domestic Policy Council and the president's and leads efforts to craft and execute the president's domestic policy. She has served as executive vice president for policy at the Center for American Progress from 1995 to 2003, and as chief counsel to Senator Edward Kennedy on the Senate Judiciary Committee. She is doing really innovative work in social enterprise and social entrepreneurial activity, and we hope to learn from that. And you should also all know that she is a graduate of the University of Michigan, which is an outstanding place to go to school. Putra Sampurna of Indonesia led his family's company to become one of the 5 big tobacco companies in Indonesia over the course of 25 years, as a board member, director, and then chairman. His diverse experience includes decades of involvement with philanthropic works, and he serves on the board of a foundation in his name that is dedicated to education in Indonesia. In March 2005, the Sampurna family sold their interest in the tobacco business to Philip Morris of the United States. He has since taken a strategic decision to reinvest a substantial portion of the proceeds from the sale in his home country in efforts to establish business opportunities for entrepreneurs and other corporate leaders. He continues to oversee strategy for his group of companies, which has a global portfolio of diversified businesses. Thank you very much for joining us today. So I'm going to start just by asking Arif if you'd like to make a short introductory statement and maybe speak a little bit about what you're looking for in great entrepreneurs.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I heard what you said about everyone having had a good lunch, but the worst part of speaking after lunch is we have to compete with the memory of the dessert. So thank you for at least focusing on this panel. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that we are actually living at a very watershed moment in the world's history. And we all have a tendency to forget the past and to think that, you know, the worst is behind us. And what a lot of people forget is that we've just lived through arguably the most traumatic times in the global financial markets that certainly anyone living today can remember. And this process has led to a whole series of things that I think we're going to see the repercussions of for many, many years to come. For example, there are untold studies on the fact that when people go through shock and when they go through the sort of cataclysmic financial events that we've all been through, they become conservative in nature. And if they become conservative in nature, they tend to save more, they tend to look at the ability to spend in a very different way. The scars don't go away for a very long time. And that, of course, has got an immediate knock-on impact on entrepreneurship around the world, because by definition, entrepreneurship is meant to be about risk-taking. Now, I will tend to disagree with that as we go forward, but one of the things that I feel very strongly about is that, at least in my part of the world, which is about all I can speak to, and my part of the world is what we call MENASA, Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia. So it's a large part of the world from Morocco to India, and encompasses most of the territories that we call the Muslim countries in the world. I think that, you know, by and large, the worst effects of the financial crisis were avoided, and a lot of growth and prospects continue to be there. Many countries in that part of the world are either oil exporters or have achieved self-reliance in the services industries and so on. And we feel in that part of the world that, you know, governments will continue to spend, governments will continue to evolve new mechanisms, of providing more capital down into the private sector, and so on. But having said that, I think it is very important to recognize that entrepreneurship and small and medium enterprises have never taken, venture capital has never taken center stage in our part of the world. I myself run a private equity firm that has always looked at opportunities of a larger scale and looked at investing into businesses that are either infrastructural in nature or provide seriously large returns on capital. We are of the view, increasingly so, that venture capital and the focus on small and medium enterprises has got to increasingly take center stage, because there are issues that are out there that can only be addressed by venture capital, entrepreneurship, and small and medium enterprises. And why is it the time to take center stage? Most primarily driven by the fact that we have got a young population. We have got a population which has got growth prospects. For example, in this region, 30% of the world's population lives. Half of them are under the age of 25. When you add that number up, that's 800 million young kids and young adults that are breaking into either education or into the workforce. And the unemployment rate that is expected, if you look at the MENA region, is anywhere up to 100 million new jobs that need to be created in the course of the next 15 odd years. Now that's a rate of job creation that is unprecedented in human history. And yet we need to do that just in order to keep our rate of unemployment constant. And these are important statistics and important facts. And to do that, the only way it's going to happen is not through government intervention. It's not going to happen by large enterprises or by state-owned corporations creating jobs. It can only happen through entrepreneurship and the creation of more and more incentives around the small and medium enterprises. Because this young population is going to want more of everything. It's going to want more consumer products. It's going to want more of the good things in life. And by and large, they all live in countries that are experiencing unprecedented growth rates. From India, we just talked about an 8.75% growth rate over the course of this year, across to countries in North Africa, countries like Egypt, where a growing middle class is increasingly asserting its capacity to spend. Countries like Pakistan, which have a large indigenous pent-up demand that is yet to be satisfied. And this youth bulge is going to become more and more important, and it's going to need job creation, it's going to need satisfaction. And the most important thing that I, at least as a participant in the regional financial services industry, have noticed is that the national borders that created and that exist across our region have begun to come down. And that's a very sort of provocative point, but they have begun to come down not because of politics and not because, you know, country X invaded country Y, but they're coming down because of business. And what business is doing is increasingly asserting its cross-border nature, especially in the Arab world, especially in the Middle East and North Africa, where companies which produce soap in Oman can just as easily sell soap in Syria. And a large proportion of this is driven by the advent of satellite TV. So what we've seen is, because of the commonality of language, we've seen the creation of investment opportunities and marketing opportunities that just didn't exist. And again, because of that, the large companies leading the way, the opportunity for small and medium enterprises has become substantial. And that is why a summit like this, which I applaud, because its timing couldn't be more perfect, it is right now that we need to focus on entrepreneurship, and we need to focus on the attributes of entrepreneurship, and to celebrate the capacity of the people inside this room to be able to create jobs and to do more and more as we go forward in the future.
Thank you. And thank you. Fred, I'm tempted to ask you whether you think we've been shocked into a more conservative nature, but I also note that you're in a unique position to identify whether you think cross-border business activity has been on the rise, and what can we do as to spur entrepreneurship in that area.
Well, I think that if you think of the 20th century as a period where countries created great independence, we saw the advent of many new countries and nation states. And if you think about the 21st century, I think it's going to be a century, at least so far, of much greater interdependence. From my vantage point as chairman of the Export-Import Bank, certainly see that in global trade, certainly see that in, I'll give you an example, we've just recently financed a project, some wind turbines made by the company Clipper Wind Turbines, designed in California, manufactured in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, shipped to Oaxaca, Mexico, which is about the best place for wind, and all organized by a French company. EDF was the sponsor. So you've got American technology, you've got Mexico determined to do renewable energy, and you have a French sponsor putting it all together. And we see that more and more often, that you're seeing that sort of cross-pollination from different countries, and frequently there'll be a bank from an entirely different country than the three I mentioned involved in the transaction. So that's certainly one thing that we're seeing at the Export-Import Bank. The other thing, since we're talking about access to capital and entrepreneurship, one of the things that I'm proud of is in running the Export-Import Bank, I came out of a family that started a family business, and although I'm in the export business now, we were in the import business in those days. But what was unique in our business was bringing products to America that were not readily available, that you didn't see in every shop or mall or other catalog company, and that gave us a competitive advantage. And one of the things I see from my vantage point at the Export-Import Bank is we help export American products, sometimes consumable, more often technology and infrastructure projects that add a different dimension to the country they're in, and therefore help create entrepreneurship and wealth. And I'll give you one example. In Indonesia, a company called Lion Air that started by two brothers in the travel business, started a small airline, and they have borrowed through the Export-Import Bank over $700 million, purchasing Boeing aircraft, building an independent, privately held airline company that in all likelihood will probably go public one day, and that's actually helping entrepreneurs in another country tap into American capital to build their business. And just in closing, you know, when we finance a product, we require the business or the sovereign to put down 15%. We finance 85%. In this environment, it's not easy to find anybody to finance 85% with 15% down. So if I have one message, that is one thing for entrepreneurs to look about importing, because you'll have an export credit agency like Exim to help finance your business.
Great, great. Well, I know you'll get many takers on that today. Lion Air is a great example, and Melody, as we turn to you, especially because it's hard to imagine a social entrepreneur finding an institution in this country or anywhere around the world where they could leverage the volume of capital, $700 million that Fred was talking about. But you've been really pioneering different ways of thinking about financing social entrepreneurship, and perhaps there's something you could tell us about that.
Sure, I'm happy to. Well, first of all, it's great to be here this afternoon. And we see social entrepreneurship as the other side of the coin from private sector or business entrepreneurship. We recognize in the private sector that's an enormous, a critical variable in the U.S. economy, contributing to 50% of U.S. jobs, 65% of U.S. jobs in the last 10 years. But at the same time, we know that it's critical that we focus on social entrepreneurship. And we believe that social entrepreneurs are really, they're transforming their communities, they're transforming our country, and indeed they're transforming the entire world. I mean, they're acting globally. And the things that we've done to focus on that have really been spurred by what we've seen already taking place in communities around the country. I don't know how many people here, for example, are familiar with the work of Jeff Canada and the Harlem Children's Zone. So Jeff is sitting in his community in Harlem, New York, and he's thinking about that 1 square mile in Harlem and what's happening to children there and their ability to go to a good elementary school all the way through K to 12 and then on to college, and recognizing all the impediments, all the hurdles that are preventing children from achieving that goal. So he set about in that community to transform and to change. And what he started many years ago now is several charter schools, also a baby college, literally going door to door, knocking on the doors of parents saying, hey, I hear you've got a new baby in your house. Let us help you in terms of the kinds of training that young parents need, particularly those who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, so that you can make sure your child is ready to learn the health benefits, the education benefits, on to elementary school, on to college, and providing wraparound services in that community to those families. That idea then spurred the president during the campaign to think about promise neighborhoods, an idea that we've started to work on to take to scale based on the idea that Jeff had and working in communities around the country. That's the premise for a lot of the work that we're doing. And we can see this in a range of different areas, really exciting social entrepreneurs taking these ideas, bringing them to scale. And now we think, well, what if we went about doing business differently in the United States, building on this idea the president had during the campaign with the Harlem Children's Zone and in turn Promise Neighborhoods. But what if we started to think about ways to set up innovation funds in the government and work in collaboration with the private sector to do business in a whole new way? Recognizing that government can't and shouldn't do everything, recognizing that the philanthropic sector isn't set up and over the last several decades hasn't been able to bring all the great organizations to scale. What if we partnered and collaborated to find the most exciting, promising ideas, promising entrepreneurs and organizations out there with some proof of their theory that we can take to scale? So that's the idea that sits behind the Social Innovation Fund that is now housed at the Corporation for National Community Service. That's the idea that sits behind what we call I3, or the Investing in Innovation Fund at the Department of Education. And we see similar funds and certainly interest in similar funds at departments and agencies across the government. Again, the best ideas on the ground, something that's been proven, people with a good idea that need that collaboration and that support and that catalyst from the private sector, the philanthropic sector, and the public sector to take it to scale in their community or around the country. And in many cases, we expect and hope to see globally.
That's great, and it is so exciting, having had the chance to see Harlem Children's Zone, to know that we have a government policy that is fundamentally focused on taking great innovations like that to scale. So it's very exciting, and it also makes me think, as we transition, Putra, to you, that you've been so successful at thinking about big scale in corporate marketing, in consumer products, and a range of other areas. And yet now, when we were talking earlier, you were very focused on very, very small scale businesses and entrepreneurship. Why have you changed your focus, and if so, why?
Thank you, Raj. You know, developing our businesses in Indonesia at that time, we had to deal with this distribution, and the distribution was very small shops and wholesalers. And these are basically the entrepreneurs that we're talking about. I think, like Arif said earlier, we're going to have a problem of finding tens of millions of jobs a year that are entering our markets. Now, you know, microfinance, the jury is still out whether microfinance actually creates jobs or it just takes care of the earning glitches in an individual. My feeling is that it does alleviate poverty on individuals, but it does not necessarily create the jobs that we need to create to satisfy the needs. To me, we need to develop, we need to instill the encouragement of developing what I call mini businesses. And those are smaller than what we normally call small businesses in the normal parlance of SMEs. You know, when we start talking about small or large importers or exporters and big innovators, we're talking about $500,000 or millions of dollars of needed capital. I'm looking more at those people that need only $10,000 to $20,000 to start up a business. So we're dealing with individuals that are less educated and basically come from the rural areas. And I think we have to find some way of encouraging them to take the first step, if you will, to create the jobs that we need. I think there's a difference in mindset of an individual wanting to open a one-man operation shop and as to somebody that would want to sit there and hire 5 salespeople. Okay, it just takes a different mindset, and we have to sit there and try to reach those individuals. So I look at, you know, hopefully that what will come out of this summit and the ones that come after is a movement, if you will, the creation of a movement for the private sector to enter the field of entrepreneurial development with the same momentum and the fervor that they entered the microfinance field, you know, after Muhammad Yunus started this great euphoria. The second theme that I'm looking at is, if you look at although the panel is on access of capital, I think you've got to look at the total equation. I don't think just saying we can help them find this money or that money does really help. We have to look at we have to look at an equation. And on the left side of the equation, we've got the entrepreneur. We've got to help them understand or aware of what services are available, what finances are available. We also have to help them with the business language, if you will, to get their concepts investment ready. Okay, and on the other side of the equation, and on top of that, we have to sit there and help them continue with their business and increasing their intellectual capacity, if you will, for those companies that have the potential to grow, because that's where we can create additional jobs. On the other side of the equation, then we have to sit there and look at the sources of the capital. I mean, you know, to me, the capital markets and investing public, okay, is very new in a lot of our markets. Okay, and this is where you might have angel funds here, but in other countries, angel funds don't exist. So I think on the other side of the equation, we have to sit there and look at how do we find the resources available, and we should also help develop that side of the equation. Banks basically do not lend to small enterprises, or they're very wary of startups. Okay, so we have to, I think a better model would be something like the SBIC in America, where private initiatives are made with their own capital, but they have access then to government funding at favorable rates. The other big area that I think is we should promote are the angel funds, where the well-to-do in society can contribute towards the challenges that we meet in entrepreneurial development. And interestingly enough, to me, our cultures of community inclusion and Sharia lending, okay, where there's shared success in the venture or failures of the venture. I think that bodes well for this whole concept of funding entrepreneurs. Okay, where you know it's participating in the good and the failures, if you will. So that's an accepted concept within our cultures. Okay, so now you're dealing with the entrepreneurs. On the other side of the equation, you're dealing with the sources of the capital, and in the middle, then what we need to do is to have a center that can bring all the different stakeholders together. Okay, and that's where you need the communications portals, where the entrepreneur can talk to mentors, and we have to find a mechanism of not, you know, a rural villager is not going to go to Jakarta to go to school and learn about entrepreneurship. So we got to sit there and figure out programs and literature, and then we have to find systems of delivering that into the rural areas, and that's going to be the big challenge. They're not going to have access to a computer. They're not going to be able to sit there and say, by the way, I got this great investment, and who do you want to, who would like to invest in my idea? So there, to me, once you do that, then at the end of the day, you have to allow the angels to talk to each other. Can we pool our resources to help this person? We have to sit there and go to the rural areas and teach people. And then we have to allow SBICs to talk to each other, and then we have to basically internationally talk to each other and learn from our own experiences. One of the things that to me that USG and other international agencies can do would be to set up a global center for entrepreneurial development, for instance, because the answers are all there, basically. It's just somebody has to sit there and bring it together. I was talking to Rick from Silatech this morning, and you know, we basically are working in the same direction. The problem is, I'm developing it on my own in Indonesia, he's developing it out in Qatar, And to me, it would make a lot more sense if we did it all together and as a group, as opposed to doing it in parallel. And I think this is where global center for entrepreneurial development under the leadership of a USG or any other international agency would be very helpful.
Well, thank you.
Okay, and then lastly, I think, it's the creation of the capital. Yeah. And that's the creation of SBICs and basically angel funds.
Good. Well, thank you. We'll come back on SBICs and on some new SME fund ideas. I do want to make sure, as I look around, I'm amazed by the quality of this gathering. And so, in addition to wanting to say hi to so many friends, we should just take some comments and questions really from the floor. Back there. And could you please introduce yourself, I think, as we do that.
My name is Junaid Iqbal, and I'm from Pakistan. And the question I have to, especially can everyone hear me? Hi, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Junaid Iqbal, and I'm from Pakistan. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be here in this distinguished gathering. The question is a slightly overarching one, but one that especially the panelists could address quite well. And it takes me to the last point you just mentioned, that you're doing something here and someone else is doing something in Qatar. Now, a lot of entrepreneurs are here from all over the Islamic world, and a lot of the people from the US government are here as well, and then there are global financial leaders like Mr. Arif Naqvi. What is it that you guys think we can all do here to take this to the next step? Because we're talking about starting VC funds, we're talking about developing ecosystems, we're talking about doing angel investing, so on and so forth. But in one part of the world, a Palestinian girl gets an opportunity to be an entrepreneur in a school class, whereas in Afghanistan, a girl does not ever go to school. So how do we crack the code on this and actually achieve some of the bigger goals that are laid out for this summit? And I think some of the best leaders on this panel could probably address that, and maybe the wider conference could think about this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Arif, can we start with you? And also, if you could weave into your comments something about your thoughts on SME funds and angel funds in response to Putra's points.
Well, I think I'll answer your question, but I'd like to sort of step back for a second and just talk about the fact that what you were saying, Putra, is something which is very relevant, which is each country has got its own initiatives going on, or each region has got its own initiatives going on, and arguably we should centralize. I think there's a lot to be said for leaving it as it is, because this whole bubbling and incentivization that is going on all over the world, harnessing the power of the web, looking at the ability of people. I mean, we're 300 people sitting in this room, but I believe there are tens of thousands watching us all around the world at embassies and other locations. That power that already exists needs to be unleashed, actually. And then you're not going to need anything called a global institution for entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship will bubble. We're all from largely the Muslim communities and Muslim countries of the world, and the one thing that all of us have in common, without doubt, is we live in reasonably paternalistic societies, and we all have or had relatively big governments, and the role of investment, the role of job creation, the role of driving opportunity was either with government or with big businesses. But I think that is changing, and I think one of the reasons why I'm very happy to be on this panel is to actually look and see at the people in this room. Behind the 300 or 200 entrepreneurs that are sitting here from Muslim communities, there are 200,000 out there at the back that are looking for that opportunity, that are looking to see where that bubble is going to come from, because this employment is going to be created by those people. So going into discussions around access to capital, going into where opportunity can come, I think that because of the fact that we are having this discussion today, because of the fact that there are lots and lots of points of access to capital, I, for example, am not a firm believer in the use of the term social entrepreneur. Everybody is an entrepreneur, and I think that we who run companies, large or small, are effectively almost moral cowards when we disregard the fact that we have an imperative which is not just to serve our shareholder, but to serve our stakeholders. And our stakeholders means our communities. We in the Muslim world largely live in communities that don't have access to running water, that don't have access to basic healthcare and sanitation. So when we look for social entrepreneurs to do their job, we're almost abrogating our responsibility. Every company in our part of the world should largely weave it into its thinking as being a part of its mandate, as a reason for its existence. And I know it's done to an extent in the West. I think it must become an imperative for our part of the world. We must be sending out a message from this conference to large companies and small companies across the Arab world, across Pakistan, across Indonesia, saying spend on your communities, because when you do that, you no longer need to ask for aid. You can start trading, you can start talking to each other with a little bit more dignity.
Well, Fred, I wonder, would you, that's a great comment, but would you build on that a little bit? If someone's coming to you asking for a loan or for financial support, are you likely to tell them to take some of that money you're giving them and invest it in their community early on?
Well, since we're a bank, we don't give away money, we lend it. Because we need to get paid back.
It's a great time to change strategy. Who's watching, Fred?
We do a lot smaller transactions. I mentioned Lion Air, but actually last year, just to give you an example, our smallest transaction was $11,000 in Pakistan, where it was to provide credit enhancement for the purchase of woodworking, wood materials for construction. So as small as $11,000. So I think the leverage, we all have our job, and at our bank, my job is to, one, help employment here, and I believe through development we help employment in the countries that we export products to. In the Lion Air example, obviously Boeing, a lot of people were involved in the construction of those aircraft, and a whole company with many hundreds and thousands of employees are working in Indonesia. Another small company in the medical area, a company I met in Florida called Dematech, which stands for Dental and Medical Technology, and they sell surgical sutures around the world. One of their clients in Cairo, IM Trading, began with purchasing as little as $50,000 a year, but with our helping both the buyer and the exporter, they're now doing 7 times that amount. They're doing over $370,000 a year. So we're able to really help that entrepreneur get the leverage, and because the United States and many other countries that have export credit agencies have a desire to help exports, because one, in terms of helping jobs here, but also helping trade, helping international cooperation, international understanding, there's a real access and a pool of capital that can be tapped into that can really help those types of projects. So that's 2 examples.
Good, thank you. I think there's a question right here in the front.
Thank you very much. My name is Fadi Ghandour. I'm from Jordan. Just a word in support and defense of the microfinance industry in the presence of Muhammad Yunus and our mentor and our godfather here. So I don't know if the jury is still out about micro-entrepreneurship being creating jobs, but I can tell you that if you ask a woman that borrows some money and ask her, are you better off today than you were after you had borrowed than before, and she would tell you most probably yes, and that is good enough for me. The other question is in time when you're spending trillions of dollars bailing out industries and bailing out banks, micro-entrepreneurs 98% of the time pay back. They pay back because they are responsible and they are people that we can bet on. So we just need to remember that as we scale down, the responsibility of paying back is much higher. So that is what we're all about here at the end of the day. This is what entrepreneurship and micro-entrepreneurship is. I just wanted to make that statement in defense of
there's one other.
And 80% of the borrowers are women. We need to remember.
We're going to take one more comment. I think there's a hand here, then we'll come back to the panel, then we'll take other comments and questions.
I'm Hala Saeed. I'm from Egypt. The question is on access to finance, talking about small and medium enterprises and micro enterprises, and one of the main challenges is access to capital and access to finance. And let's face the fact that whether banks or other financial intermediaries, their main focus is basically our commercial institutions, and the bottom line is their main emphasis. They want to make profit, and the idea of providing capital or finance to small and medium enterprises is really a challenge for these enterprises. My question is here, what can we do? What is the model here? Whether we, in Egypt, we have quite the past 2 years, we have a great emphasis and a great focus on access to finance. A lot of institutions in Egypt are basically very supportive to this initiative, whether from the banking sector or others. And we are training bankers to provide finance to entrepreneurs. We are also training entrepreneurs to be bankable, providing them to present proper cash flow, put proper business strategies and things like that. However, still the mindset. It's the issue of changing the mindset of people to, Mr. Ghandour was talking about repayment, and they know, everybody knows that repayment is very high in this segment. However, there's still reluctancy for this. The other issue is for the startups. Nobody wants to offer finance. Finance for startups is really a major challenge rather than the ongoing business. So I just want to, is it basically we're talking about specialized institutions? Is it the commercial banks? Is it the investment banks? What is the best model? And how can we, I know we are on the right track. It may be, it's slow because we need to change the mindset, but we want to make this move faster because this will definitely have a major impact on economic growth and development in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think we'll come to Putra and Melody with these questions about how do you change the mindset? And one of the things that was a wonderful comment about microfinance, whether, sir, we agree that it is a large employment generation activity or not, either way, it has clearly changed the mindset where so many millions of people who are not previously called entrepreneurs now think of themselves as entrepreneurs. Maybe, Putra, you can speak about how do you change the mindset in that mini business category you started talking about?
Well, first of all, I never meant to sit there and say we don't need to do microfinancing, but I'm saying that the momentum that was generated of getting the private sector to help in that can now be also now persuaded to sit there and enter the next field, if you will, of helping mini businesses. Now, as far as changing the mindset is concerned, I mean, there's, you know, we cannot rely on public funding if on a sustaining basis. We need to get private sector involvement, and to me, a mindset change is bringing the awareness of the needs of the country and of the people in lifting their social status. And you know, in Indonesia, for instance, the government requires or encourages banks to set up 20% of their portfolio in SME financing. Yeah. Well, encouragement and incentivizing them to do so are two different things. So I think it requires government, it requires the international community to nudge our governments into coming out with the policies that will support this. And that, to me, is the first phase. The second part of it is institutions like ourselves in doing the marketing on making people aware. Okay, so the mindset change, that's what I was saying earlier, is like an equation. You have to deal with the entrepreneurs themselves, but then you have also to deal with the other side of the equations, which are the lending institutions, as well as governments. And to me, if you have to get private sector involvement, then it's basically going to be, in my opinion, in our countries, angel funds, for lack of a better word. I mean, you know, call them good Samaritans or whatever. But you know, angel funds, and to me, specialized institutions, and that's another thing that we can nudge government to sit there and adopt policies of setting up things like the SBICs. And you know, and what I wasn't saying about a global, what I meant was a knowledge consortium, if you will, because we're doing a lot of the same thing. So now, if somebody developed a portal, okay, that we can use. Why should we reinvent or spend a lot of money in developing?
Is that portal's knowledge sharing is perfect.
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying. You know, if we had a knowledge consortium on a global basis that does the research of the functionalities are basically the same, and you know we can share. You know, this is the experience in Indonesia. This is the experience in Qatar, and you know, okay, let's find that compromise position and just develop the functionalities and the delivery systems, and that can then be franchised out to wherever.
No, that's very important, and thank you. Melody, maybe you could address the same question from the perspective of the social sector and also defend the construct Arif thought maybe social entrepreneur is not an accurate label. And I know he's saying that partly to be provocative, so let's, I wonder if you have thoughts on that.
Sure, sure. Before I touch on that, I do want to say that as a policy matter, we're constantly thinking through our various institutions about ways to try and push capital into the marketplace for small and medium-sized businesses. I mean, you think about the work that Karen Mills does at the Small Business Administration. That is, she gets up in the morning and through the day until she goes to bed at night is thinking about ways to support small businesses. But it's also happening at the Commerce Department. You know, Fred is thinking about it. Ron Kirk is thinking about that at USTR. And in fact, all the agencies and departments across the government have requirements that require them to think about ways to support small business. I was just with the person who heads the Small Business Administration at the Department of Defense, billions and billions and billions of dollars, and they are supposed to think about that every single day. So we're trying to pull and push those levers. And in fact, through the Recovery Act and the work that we've been doing there is we've just been trying to unfreeze the markets coming out of the recovery, but recognizing the particular difficulties for small businesses, putting $1 billion into community development financial institutions so that they specifically are working with small businesses and nonprofits in their communities to try and make sure that those businesses have access to capital. So we're constantly thinking about those levers as well. On the social entrepreneurship side, I think it's a fascinating comment that you make, and it's a really interesting debate to have. And when you look at businesses, you know, and recognizing that the bottom line for them in many cases is profits and their responsibility to their shareholders. At the same time, there's been a growing movement, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have seen it in terms of corporate social responsibility. I think the smartest companies are thinking about ways to align their pro-social programs with their bottom line. So it isn't that we make widgets and we are contributing to this wonderful social cause over here, but thinking about we make widgets, what should, should we be contributing to a job training program for people to ensure that they are getting the proper certification coming out of high school or college so that we have a workforce that can make better widgets. And I think that's smart, and we certainly support that. I've been doing work with a number of companies over the years to encourage the growth of that. But I still think there's a different focus when people get up in the morning and they are thinking about the bottom line and their shareholders, and people who get up in the morning and are thinking about transformation and impact in their communities. How do we get more teachers to the places where we need more teachers? How do we make sure that children who are growing up and their parents may not have been to college and they may not have access to adequate health care, or they didn't before we passed health care reform, and we're here toward that. But if they don't have access to those kinds of resources, how do we change that in their community? And if someone is doing it really, really well, how to take it to other communities? I was in New Orleans several months ago, and I went to a place called Cafe Reconcile, and just to think about the benefits of social entrepreneurship. And I was talking to, and Cafe Reconcile is a cafe, but it's also a job training program for some of the most hard-hit communities and individuals living in New Orleans. And training them, recognizing the big hospitality market in New Orleans, training them to work in restaurants and in hotels across the city. And working with young people, if you could meet them, and I'm sure you've met them in your communities all around the world. Drug use, teen pregnancy, broken homes, et cetera. But to meet these young people and to hear their stories. And one young man told me he's one of 10. And so he has 9 younger brothers and sisters. And literally, the act of him getting up in the morning to get dressed to go to work and look professional, he said all of his brothers and sisters would get up to watch him do that and to literally clap as he walked out of the door. He's changing the way that they're thinking about work and what it means to get up and be responsible for work every day. That is one of the benefits that's coming off of the work that Cafe Reconcile is doing. It isn't about a profit, although they are running a business, but it's also about how they're transforming the community and transforming the lives of those individuals who are being impacted by that program. So I think having this happen across the board is critical, but I think social entrepreneurship still has its important place in our society.
Great, thank you. I know there are some more questions there. We'll go in the back first.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم. Fatima min Mauritanie. Je vais parler un peu en français pour si ça ne vous dérange pas parce que je ne parle pas bien l'anglais. Bon, je dirige une organisation de femmes chefs d'entreprise en Mauritanie. Et je voudrais vous poser ici des questions. J'espère que je vais trouver une solution. Depuis 2 ans, l'entrepreneuriat féminin dans notre pays, elle commence à être un peu fatiguée à cause de ces années de crise économique. Et je voudrais aussi vous expliquer que chez nous, on a fait le social avec l'entreprise. Parce que cette organisation elle regroupe 500 membres. Et on a créé des mutuelles de crédit et d'épargne, une mutuelle pour les petites et moyennes entreprises, une mutuelle pour l'artisanat et le tourisme, et une mutuelle pour les commerçantes. Bon, tous ces mutuelles qui ont été créées, c'est sur nos fonds propres. Les femmes ont cotisé et on a réalisé ça sur nos fonds propres et on a essayé de contacter tous les organismes financiers pour qu'ils puissent venir à notre aide et on n'a pas trouvé de réponse. Mais c'est ce qui nous a donné le courage qu'on a pu avancer. Quand on n'a pas eu un financement, on s'est dit qu'il faut se baser sur nous-mêmes et il faut avancer. Et depuis, ça fait en 2004 que ces mutuelles ont été créées. On donne crédit, les femmes payent et ça marche. Mais tout cela, c'est sur nos propres fonds. Donc maintenant, le problème de l'entreprise féminine, c'est l'accès au crédit. L'accès au crédit est un peu difficile. Et en ce qui concerne aussi, il y a des femmes qui veulent faire des industries. Nous, on ne peut pas parvenir à leur financement pour des grands projets. On intervient pour des crédits à moyen terme. Mais on ne peut pas couvrir les financements à long terme pour en ce qui concerne l'industrie féminine. Donc maintenant, les gouvernements, les organismes financiers doivent impliquer les femmes, le secteur privé, et essentiellement les femmes. Donc, je remercie le gouvernement américain, je remercie le président Obama pour cette rencontre, et j'espère que cette rencontre apportera quelque chose à nos entreprises pour le futur. Et merci.
Thank you. let me, I'm a poor translator, but let me try, since I was listening in English, and I don't know if you were, right? No, okay.
It's all in your hands.
The way the technology is working today. So
like it this way.
thank you very much for that wonderful comment, and I will try to paraphrase what you just said briefly, that you're running a group of businesses with women in Mauritania, and over the last 2 years, there's been a tremendous amount of activity, but some lost momentum in supporting access to credit for those women entrepreneurs. That there's been a significant blend of social work and business in the enterprises in your group, savings exchanges, artisan, shopkeepers, a full range of activities. And women are contributing to these funds, but your efforts to recruit larger scale financial support from formal financial institutions have not been effective. So it sounds like the women in the group have been creating their own revolving credit pool, supporting each other to take on ever larger programs, but they can't seem to get access to the larger scale finance to do industrial type projects that could really be drivers of real growth. And your concluding comment we appreciate, which was thanking President Obama for bringing us together today to solve that problem. And that, and that of course, is a tremendous, did I do okay for those of you listening? But that's such a common problem that we hear about over and over, where now there are millions of particularly female entrepreneurs that have reached a certain scale and potentially could go that next level. And yet it is harder to connect them once they leave perhaps the microfinance institutional environment to that next level of financial support. So Arif, maybe I'd start with you and then go to Fred, but you also could talk a little bit about how you think about supporting small and medium enterprises. Can you envision specific carve-outs or solutions for this particular problem, and how would you pursue that?
Well, I think the one thing that we all agree is what a number of people have said so far, which is that banks do not like lending to entities that are below a certain scale or size on their radar screen, and generally speaking operate on very, very strict and tight commercial principles. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, and we have to understand that it is not a bank's duty to lend. It is good for the bank to follow a particular process, because at the end of the day, as we've come to see over the last couple of years, banks actually are the ultimate moral arbiter of ensuring that a financial system remains secure. However, there is clearly a need and a clear opportunity for funds and government entities, whether in the United States or in the individual countries, to start operating on a much more aggressive basis in this sector, because as we've all discussed, this is the sector that is going to lead to growth. Now, for example, in my region that I operate in, I see countries like Egypt, Jordan. I could name actually a lot of countries that are very aggressively following a very sensible and sustained route to developing and evolving a enabling framework for small and medium enterprises. Unfortunately, I can't comment on Mauritania. I don't know anything about it. And that's my ignorance, not the fact that it's not being done there. However, communication, which is critical. Like you said, a lot of different enterprises in different geographies are doing things. I think, again, harnessing the power of the web, again, harnessing the availability of knowledge, the idea of bringing together knowledge-sharing platforms is an excellent one. Secondly, the availability of capital through new funds being set up and providing a strong intermediary impact with governments in order to bring in localized support systems in individual countries is the way to go. And there is no substitute to providing that capital. It is that capital with the expectation of lower earnings. Everybody in this room and outside this room over the course of the last 10 years made a fair amount of money and exhibited some form of greed. Well, it is a little bit of time to reduce that expectation on earnings and start talking a little bit more about that enabling environment.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad to hear you mention the enabling environment. I had wanted to point out that about half of the 56 countries in the Islamic Conference score in the bottom quartile of the World Bank's access to credit report. So in addition to all of the wonderful entrepreneurial activities we're talking about today, fixing that enabling environment is part part of that solution. Fred, I don't know if you have something to
I
add
would
given
say
the
a couple of things.
SBA
I mean,
background.
President Obama made it very clear the importance of small business in terms of export and trade. I believe that's one reason he asked me to take this position, having been at the SBA under President Clinton and been in a family business founded by a woman in 1951. Although I mentioned Lion Air and I mentioned some large transactions, 88%, so out of 100 transactions, 88 of them are small businesses. We are overwhelmingly helping small businesses. And one thing we also find is that small businesses tend to sell to other companies of a similar size in terms of a scale. So a lot of what we do at the Export-Import Bank is really help transfer American products from small companies here to small companies overseas. So that's the overwhelming number of transactions. It's not the overwhelming number of dollars, but it's certainly the overwhelming number of transactions. And I would say, perhaps because I grew up in a business founded by a woman, on a few of my trips, I have found when we would go into country and meet with business leaders, I was in a room with 8 men, 10 men, 12 men. And so what I have started to do in each country is have a meeting that I only invite women entrepreneurs to. And I've done that in Colombia, I've done that in Mexico, and I've done that in each country where men are not allowed, unless they're the waiter. But the only people in the room are women to try and find ways that we can really connect much more closely with that community.
Great, great. Let's take a few more questions. Let's take 2 or 3 quick comments, and then we'll come back to the panel. So we'll start over there with your hand up.
My name is Shinta Wijaya Kamdani from Indonesia. I think listening to all this, I think this is definitely a great venue of sharing best practices from entrepreneurs from all over the world. However, listening to you, Ms. Barnes, specifically, I can see that how great it is, the government involvement in terms of, government, the U.S. government itself in putting entrepreneurship as a priority agenda, and then to help the private sectors in then coming up with their initiative on the implementation. I can see this as one of the biggest issues that our challenge in Indonesia in terms of the government support. More or less one ministry, we're talking about coordination of many ministry. And I can see that this is going to be a major issue because a lot of the private sector initiative will go to the drain unless there is certain support that's given by the government. So while I think your president obviously has initiated such a great idea like this, I'm trying to think on how best way that somehow there will be a call for action to also from the government of other countries to really get involved in this whole process, because I think entrepreneurship is not just a private sector issue. It's everybody's issue, and it has to start from the government. Unless the government comes with the right policies and regulation, this is all will go to waste. So I would like to see your comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't we come here? Would you like?
My name is Shahnaz Hussain. I'm from India. I started by borrowing $5,000 from a bank. I opened a salon in the house because it's too expensive to take a shop, and today, 30 years later, we have 800 shops worldwide and have gone into the Guinness Book of Records as the largest herbal chain of its kind in the world. We make cosmetics from plants, Ayurveda, which is plant power, and of course, trying to control the use of chemicals for beauty. I would like to thank President Obama for this fabulous idea of bringing all of us together to promote entrepreneurship. I think that all of us should be very, very grateful that a man like Obama walks the earth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. One more right there at the middle table, and then we'll come back to our panel.
Salam alaikum. Excusez-moi, je voudrais parler en français. Je m'appelle Amadou Moussa. Je viens du Cameroun. Donc, si maintenant, concrètement, on dispose d'un projet qui répond aux critères d'éligibilité, qu'est-ce qu'on fait? On les dépose dans nos ambassades ou alors on rencontre le président Okber tout à l'heure? Voilà ma question. Merci.
I don't need to translate that, I don't suppose. Well, Melody. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, we'll do that next. Melody, you want to take the great question about how can we get other country governments to be partners at promoting social entrepreneurship, and if you're also welcome to take to answer the question about whether the president is able to directly interact on specific ideas today.
Sure. Well, I think on social entrepreneurship that we are all in many ways kind of going through this together. That the U.S. government embracing of this idea. We've certainly seen social entrepreneurs at work and the great benefit of it, and supported it in very isolated ways over time. But I think our embracing of it as a new way of doing business is something that we're just starting to do. I mean, the president asked me, and as part of the Domestic Policy Council that I direct, to create an Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation, which we did. And the director of my office, Sonal Shah, and another colleague, Charlie Anderson, are here somewhere in the audience today to lead that effort. So I think in many ways on social entrepreneurship, we're also learning with you. And we're learning based on the past experiences and what we've seen work and doesn't work through wonderful organizations around the United States and across the world. We're learning from the way that we've seen organizations scale up, and these funds that we've started, one of the things that we are asking, that we are requiring, is data and metrics. We have to have good, solid, evidence-driven information so that we can determine how to refine what we're doing and how to share that in forums like this with people from around the world. I think in entrepreneurship and generally that the president, you're absolutely right, really thinks that this is something that's very important. The support for small business is important and because small businesses and entrepreneurs are such an economic engine for this country and for countries around the world. I've also seen, I spent about 10 years working on Capitol Hill, however, the struggles around that and thinking about how to support small business, how to support women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses that are often struggling in terms of access to capital and access to opportunity, thinking about our policies around access to capital, but also our policies generally as we're setting the law and passing laws to make sure that we are encouraging and supporting small businesses and entrepreneurship in a way that's consistent with our values and not being a burden on or kind of shackling their growth and development. So that's something that we continue to work on because the president believes that it's so critical to our economic recovery because people in small towns and cities all over the country are those with the best ideas, whether they're social entrepreneurs or private sector entrepreneurs. So finding ways through our policies, through our institutions across the government to support their work, something that we believe in, it's important. But I think continuing these kinds of forums, we're thinking about the future and other ways that we can engage with people around the world will be a way that we can share not only what we've already done, but share and have a conversation about what we're learning together so that we can support these movements around the world.
I think we're going to go to this side of the room. I did just want to add to that in addition to those types of funds and that approach guiding so much of our domestic work, that in our international assistance portfolio we're doing quite a lot of that as well. And I know both the President and the Secretary will have an opportunity to talk about some of the initiatives that are the result of applying that way of thinking to this portfolio of work. Over here.
Yes, my name is Antoine Abou Samra. I'm the Managing Director of Better Young Entrepreneurs Program from Lebanon. We're an apolitical, religious organization that supports entrepreneurs from the high-impact entrepreneurs from the moment they have an idea up to the moment where they're going to reach out at the international scale. And at the same time, we work at the macro level where we're working on changing the business environment Our organization was created by 40 of the top business leaders in our country, and so we have a great support in the private sector. We're talking about access to finance. One of the first things Badr did was in 2006 create one of the first venture capital fund in Lebanon. We raised $17 million from European Investment Bank and local banks and individuals. It was at a time where there was the Lebanese-Israeli war, so a very hard period of time, but we were able to instill confidence. Then we found out that what was missing also, and an important link, is seed financing, the equity part or seed equity in business angels investment. This is why we created the first business angel network in Lebanon. But it's very hard, as you were mentioning, is the culture of business angels or seed financing, equity seed financing. In the US, for instance, it's been there for a very long time, and you're accustomed to do this. When we talk about regions like Lebanon or other countries in the Middle East, it's much harder because the culture and the approach to seed financing doesn't really exist. And so we had a hard time to start up. We started about a year ago, and we started getting angel investors. And we make them understand that it's very important because those entrepreneurs that you're financing now will be the deal flow of the next VC and the next private equity funds that exist in the region. And then you're creating jobs. And then you're doing good basically for society in general. So they're starting to get the idea about it. They're starting to get the approach of it. And they don't take it as a financial investment to start with. If they're going to make gains in the future, then it will be all the better. But the first approach is really to make them understand that they are supporting the future generation of job creators and revenue generation. But the hard part, as you were mentioning at the beginning is the culture. How to instill that culture of putting your hand in your pocket, getting those dollars out, and just giving them out to somebody that has an idea and has a passion, and trust them to make it work. Yeah. And this is something that is, I think, the financiers here at the panel would understand on how difficult this is and how to make the step to get more angel investors and seed financing in the region.
Thank you. Why don't we go to Arif to comment on that?
I actually have a bit of an issue with what you said, Antoine, for the simple reason that we have to differentiate between charity and philanthropy and hard-nosed venture capital, okay? The venture capital industry, as it exists in this part of the world, are no angels, okay? There is some very hard-nosed thinking that goes into the analysis. But having said that, I think that in our part of the world, the reason why venture capital never took off, the reason why angel investing never took off, is because the exit model was never there. Our markets, whether it's Lebanon, whether it's Egypt, whether it's Algeria, all of these countries have small domestic markets taken in isolation, and therefore the exit model was never there. Therefore, you'll never be able to create the scale that enables a company to become large. However, because of what I was saying earlier about how our region, the MENA region specifically, is changing and evolving in the sense that businesses, corporate businesses, large businesses have brought borders down. The ability for companies, especially driven through technology in the net, means that their potential consumer for their product is now the 350 million Arab people. Suddenly you have scale and you have the opportunity to extrapolate. So that is why disciplined investors are coming into the venture capital space and into the angel space. And we mustn't confuse it with philanthropy, because that is a class of investment on its own. However, the venture capital industry in the region must take center stage. The investment into SME must take center stage, even at the expense, arguably, of private equity, because this is where the future is. And anybody that denies it is just not seeing the writing on the wall.
That's wonderful. Good. Please, Putra.
You know, what I'm hearing here, most of the questions are related to mindset change. And to me, it's a question of having these centers that can be the catalyst within each country to do the marketing, of providing the services to wannabe angels. Okay, to, you know, for what we were talking, what the lady over there was saying just now, we're helping women's cooperatives, and what the banks want from us are comfort zone. Okay, so we sit there and say, okay, we're supporting this cooperative. All of a sudden, the comfort zone of the bank increases. So the other facility that the USAID has, for instance, if I go to Arif and sit there and say, by the way, would you help this fund to do this type of project? Okay, I could then go to the DCA, for instance, and sit there and says, okay, if the DCA guarantees this much, are you more willing? So he's got two. He's got comfort from the USAID, and he's also got comfort from the center in Indonesia that is supposedly a credible source of information. And then he'd be more willing to sit there and provide the funding like for the cooperatives of that lady. The other thing, the same thing with nudging government. This is again the same thing, a mindset change. And unless we have these centers for entrepreneurial development that can be the champions, okay, and somehow, you know, this summit is a knowledge consortium. I mean, the knowledge that is available here is tremendous. I would like to see it a little bit more on a formalized basis, where it becomes an entity that does specifically research on what the outcomes are. And that would be the way to sit there and nudge the governments like our government in Indonesia or anywhere else of saying, this is good for your country. But unless, if I as a businessman go to Indonesia, yeah, what's in it for you?
Yeah.
You know, but we need something on an international basis, and that's what I was saying earlier, because if it becomes a knowledge consortium, then it has the credibility to sit there and tell our governments, look, here is why it's good for you, this is what it's going to do for your country, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Good. Thank you. Why don't we come right here, and then we'll go back there.
Thank you. I'm Puni from Indonesia. I just one very quick question. Maybe Fred, you would like to answer, but it's welcome for all of you. Who is the responsible group to create instrument or mechanism that makes the money that I saw there everywhere is so huge bunch, but going to the right direction for those who really need the money and do things properly? Who is responsible to create that instrument? Thank you.
Okay. In the back, yeah.
Alamin Usman from Cameroon. I have two short questions. My impression with social entrepreneurship is probably the intensity of feeling the fact that one is social entrepreneur is not the same thing when you start a business, when you grow the business, and probably when you sell it and become wealthy. I would like to know, is it the same feeling you had before, Arif and Putera? And then I will come back to Ben's. If my presumption is correct, how do you make sure when you start a business, when you grow it, when you run it, you behave socially responsible?
Ooh, lovely.
Good. Okay, well, these are big questions.
Lovely
So we'll come to the group first to talk about how do we target, how do we build institutional partnerships so that credit or equity or whatever other instrument we're using to target resources reaches the communities that really do need them and don't otherwise have access, and then come to the panel to answer that set of questions. Fred, do you want to take that
I'll
first?
throw one other comment out. I think when I served at the Small Business Administration in the late 90s, in thinking about this, and after I left the administration, I was dean of a school of public policy, and we quote-unquote taught social entrepreneurship, which is but I think about social entrepreneurship as having sort of a double or triple bottom line, thinking about not only profits, but look at how you impact the environment, how you impact the sort of community that you're in. I'll say something maybe somewhat, at least we found this at the SBA, that women entrepreneurs in this country and minority entrepreneurs in this country tended to be far more socially responsible, generally speaking, than men who are entrepreneurs. I found that when we were at the SBA, that women who were in business and minority business owners tended to make sure they reached out to the community, provided mentorship, provided opportunities for other people like themselves in far greater proportion than we found in entrepreneurs as a whole. So to some extent, it may be just, it was somewhat cultural, and there maybe was a sense that coming from that community that made it more difficult, they actually tended to give back or tended to think more community-minded in their pursuit of their business. That was our experience in the late 90s.
All right.
I'll address the question that you asked, and I think what you were asking was essentially a little bit along the journey of entrepreneurism and then eventually the social responsibility. Look, I think of myself as much an entrepreneur as the young lady who was sitting in this chair in the first session. I feel the same sense of excitement when I go to work every morning. I have the same sense of wonderment at the world around me, and I have the same passion for what I do compared to what she was doing. The difference is age and arguably a little bit of scale. However, everybody, I feel, that believes in the concept of entrepreneurship must constantly also be thinking about reinventing themselves. Because, you know, somebody very smart once said, today's peacock is tomorrow's feather duster. Unless you evolve, you're really condemned to something completely different. So I have to say to you that having run a very large private equity firm by regional standards and managing billions of dollars of money, the one thing that drives me more than anything else is to make sure that my colleagues understand that they must not take themselves seriously. They must continue to work as hard as they ever did. And most important of all, think of being a company with the same heart beating at its center. So for that, you cannot lose the social perspective either. And that is why, at least in our case, we are totally focused on the stakeholder approach. And you know, this may sound a little bit strange coming from a private equity firm that's driven by the profit imperative, but the reality is that unless you build up your communities, and I take a very simple example, if I have, for example, 30 to 35 companies in our portfolio as partner companies, and every single one of them starts spending $4 or $5 million in socially responsible work, suddenly in our part of the world we've created a platform that is spending $100 to $200 million a year in socially responsible work. Now that is a very large capacity in terms of being able to drive sustainable change.
Okay. And Arif, we all know that somewhere around this world there is some small woman-owned business that is making feather dusters that might take offense to your comment. Why don't we go here? And I think are we okay on time?
Well,
yes.
Arguably she'll need the peacock to get to the feather dust.
Oh yeah.
Hi.
And we'll come.
I'm Iman from Jordan.
Why don't we go here?
Actually, my question is, how can entrepreneur be positive, intervene with the government or with the central bank, instead of let the governments crash down? Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to try that one as well as the earlier comment that was directed to you?
And I believe the question was, how do you know you're being socially responsible? Which I think is a wonderful and interesting question. I think for social entrepreneurs, certainly the goal is to get up in the morning and think about ways to have an impact to transform your community. And people can define how they want to do that and what is success in any number of different ways. For us, as we are thinking about using federal taxpayer dollars and investing them through the Social Innovation Fund, through the I3 Fund and other funds, we've set certain goals, you know, with the Social Innovation Fund around economic development and opportunity, around the I3 Fund, which is housed at the Department or will be housed at the Department of Education, around education reform and local communities with local school districts and not-for-profit organizations. And in doing that, we've set a certain set of metrics, and we are also requiring, as I had mentioned earlier, data to show what that transformation will be. And it isn't just, oh, you know, you think that you've had a wonderful impact on this community, but how are you having an impact? And we're going through a very rigorous process with the Office of Management and Budget, with my office, and working with the departments and agencies to come up with a standard for evaluation and metrics so that we can chart and we can see the course of how the programs that are being funded, how we're using taxpayer dollars in a responsible way based on the goals that we've set forth. Certainly another administration could come along and say, we like this idea, but we see this in a very different way, and we'll have a different set of standards in terms of what is social responsibility. But I think that's a way to do it in a responsible and thoughtful way, and to invest those taxpayer dollars wisely. I think even as private investment in VCs are thinking about a smart use of their dollars, it is incumbent upon us to use federal dollars in a way that minimizes risk, but tries to to support the reward that we will get from those dollars.
So I recognize we are out of time. Mo, if you would like to make the last comment, you're welcome to. But it can't be a question. It has to be a brilliant insight that we can all take away. And then I'll come back and ask one or two panelists to share that. But
I'm really a little bit worried about this session. It ended up really about social entrepreneurship. We have this session on social entrepreneurship tomorrow. Today it was about an access to finance. People need to understand entrepreneurs are not beggars, are not going around asking for social help or social security. There are a wonderful opportunity for investment. People who want to make money, they go invest in smart entrepreneurs. The guy who supported Bill Gates or the gentleman who spoke to us from Yahoo, those people made a lot of money. And they did not do it because of social responsibility, because they are do-gooders, because they are greedy, they want to make money. Unfortunately, in this world, the money exists with the greedy people. The trillions of dollars exist with the major hedge funds and private equity. Those are the people who are trying to entice to come and support our entrepreneurship in order to build our businesses. Our world is not going to change by microfinance, with full respect to my great friend, Mohammed. No. These are all poverty affiliations. These are aspirins. It will change by building businesses, creating real jobs. And that will require massive investments. And I would hope we'd have really focus our discussion here, how we're going to solve the problem of SME. Everybody talk about SME. Then everybody drops the S and all went to the M. Because nobody could develop a model whereby I created a fund for Africa. And beside my foundation, and we give people $200 million, say, invest in Africa. Somebody come to those people and say, I have a wonderful idea, I need $1 million. Say, sorry, we're not talking to you. When you need $10 million, come and talk to me. Yeah. And that is the problem. Because the problem is to you due diligence for somebody who needs $100,000 is very expensive. So they cannot deal with that. And I was hoping to hear something creative about how we're going to help the guys doing this SME stuff to move on, because that's what our world will. You need social entrepreneurship. Come on, guys. Hamas is doing that. Come on. Okay. We're not here to do that.
Thank you. So we're going to... We are.
So let us be real.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. And I knew I was getting into some trouble letting Mo have the final word. Let me just say that I'm going to ask Arif. I think you asked to make the final comment, but on behalf of this group, will you make a brief final and brief response to Ro? And unfortunately, we won't all get a chance to respond to that, and then I will summarize and get us off stage so that we can continue with the wonderful two-day plan here.
Okay, you want me to respond to that?
That's
like not easy.
You have, yes.
Well, you see, fundamentally, I have to say a lot of what you said, I personally, I can't speak for everyone, agree with what you were saying. This is not about social enterprise. That's why, at least in my case, I started off by saying I don't understand the meaning of the word social entrepreneur. When a friend over there said that, investing into new startups should be an act of charity, or at least people should recognize that they're giving money away, they may never get it back. Completely erroneous, in my opinion, to not make the difference between something founded as a business enterprise. I think in my part of the world, this is changing. The reality that governments need to play more of an enabling role and less of a control role is beginning to set in. I see a lot of change in countries all the way from the UAE to Bahrain to Jordan to Egypt. I can give you a list of many people that are thinking the way you have just said. Finally, the point on SMEs, I think if you remove the S from the SME, you might as well not do it, because then what you're doing is private equity, okay? What they call growth private equity. I hate labels, but at least speaking on my behalf, very clearly, if you don't invest in the S, if you don't invest in small and medium enterprises, as certainly people like us are totally focused on now doing, and announcing very major initiatives in that area imminently, I think we're not going to be able to get the job creation issue resolved. We're not going to be able to work with governments in partnership to create new opportunity. And most important of all, every single one of those enterprises has the capacity to return substantial amounts to investors because they're run by good people that have the right motivation.
Thank you. So I think we should just take a moment to note that I think, Putra, you started this conversation today by talking about mini businesses and the funding gap and capital gap around mini businesses. Arif, you've talked a lot about different venture forms and angel investing capabilities to fill that gap. Fred, we appreciate your bringing so many different types of tools and examples that are both export-import, but also the small business types of tools. And Melody, we appreciate that there is a role for social entrepreneurship that is lively and vibrant, and we know, Mo, you are a major supporter of the concept, so as well as so many other wonderful examples here. And I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. This is such an outstanding group. We could be here. I certainly would love to be here for another hour or two, but they'll never let me back. So thank you very much, and a special thanks to our panelists as we wrap up today.